Morning, everyone. Lots going on today, but a couple of stories from me first before we get into the news. Today is Father's Day, and Father's Day is important because, well, a lot of times dads are kind of crazy and they go off and they do crazy things, but at the same time, dads are around and helpful, and they do things in a way that you don't expect and that help in a way that you don't expect. And here's an example. When I was a kid, I had two paper routes, two different newspapers. I don't know why I did. Why not? And my brother had a paper route. So there's three paper routes between us. And my dad used to load up the papers in the car and meet us, Mikey, my brother and I, on the way home from school. And so we'd start our paper route on the way home. And sometimes, if we were lucky, he'd just do the whole paper route for us. And we'd come home and it'd be like, oh, no papers today. And we'd be super excited about that. And that was just helpful because he had a goal too. It wasn't like he just wanted to help us, although he did want to help us. He had a goal too. He wanted time to do X, Y, Z. We were leaving for the cottage or, whatever, some reason. He wasn't just doing our job for us. Because part of the lesson was to have a job, right? Part of the lesson was that you've got a responsibility. You've got to do this thing. If I'm not driving this out here, you're walking back out to do the papers. And there were many nights that I did walk home, walk back out to do the papers. But having a day to celebrate dads is important. And also recognizing you need your family to enable you to do those extra things. You need your support, the support of like your wife, your kids, the people around you, to enable you to do the thing you like. Like if you like getting up at 5 a.m. to go fishing, or if you like to go hunting for a weekend, or if you like to go sit in your garage and yell at a camera about politics for a few hours a day every day, then you need people to support you, right? And a funny story, like my kids wanted to do something special, so they wanted to do breakfast in bed for me, and I get up around 5, and so that kind of doesn't work for me necessarily. So my wife said to them, like, I think what your dad likes is just doing exactly what he does every day. If we could just do that for him, that would be wonderful. And we came up with another thing that the kids are going to help with. They're going to make a cake or something like that, which is wonderful. But it's that kind of support. It's that kind of thoughtfulness. It's that kind of give and take that make days like this important. So I know I've spent a few minutes on this, and one last thing before we get into the news. I get emails sometimes, and they're wonderful emails. Sometimes they're news tips, and sometimes they're people saying thanks for the work you do, and sometimes they're people asking for a request. And so Scott, Luke, Vivian, and Lisa reached out to me, and they said, our dad Richard watches you all the time, and he's a wonderful dad, and we wanted you to say a big shout out to Richard for being a wonderful dad. So Richard, you got a wonderful family there, man. Thanks for watching, dude. And thank you guys for reaching out, and have a great Father's Day. I hope you do. Okay, moving into the news. Government COVID-19 emergency measures are the death of civil liberties by 1,000 cuts. Report. Okay. The many emerging laws and regulations introduced to target the COVID-19 pandemic have amounted to the death of civil liberties by 1,000 cuts, a new report says. The nonprofit Canadian Civil Liberties Association, CCLA, on Friday released a lengthy document that reviews emergency measures introduced by federal, provincial, and municipal levels of government in recent months, which authorized everything from unlimited spending powers to hefty fines for people who fail to practice social distancing. The organization asserts that those measures amount to a broad overreach of government powers that, left unchecked, threaten to become permanent. The pandemic has led to 1,000 impositions on civil liberties that might feel minor alone, but which taken together represent an extraordinary change to civil liberties in Canada, the report said. Limits to civil liberties include government-led initiatives to curb misinformation, mandatory masks or temperature checks in private settings, restricted access to public settings, or even attempts to hinder drive-in religious services, the report said. And here's something about the masks. Face masks for healthy people are not a good idea. Here's the CDC, and it's talking about influenza. And here is somebody talking about pleurisy, which is a lung infection that you can get if you're rebreathing your own oxygen and you have like a cold or something to that effect. You could absolutely infect yourself with that. So it's interesting. With the mandatory mask order, I live in a city where there is a mandatory mask order, and you can opt out of it, but I'll tell you, they definitely there are multiple people who come up to me every time I go shopping now, and tell me who tell me incorrect information. They tell me it's against the law to be in the store without a mask. That's not true. It's a public order. It's not a law. Anyway, back to this. Limits to civil liberties include government-led initiatives to curb. Each of these constrain freedoms in what some might consider small ways, but taken together, they indicate a major shift in Canada towards a more designated, circumscribed, and government-ordered way of doing things. The study underscores the deep divisions that have surfaced in recent months as the public grapples with the extent to which the government should control public life in the name of safety. Hefty fines issued by municipal police to people walking their dogs, for example, have been called an unnecessary overreach by some, while others argue that those fines might be seen as part of a broader need for compliance in order to curb the spread of the virus. The CCLA report does not outright dismiss the need for emergency measures to combat COVID-19, but said the inconsistent and sometimes illogical nature of those policies likely reduced their effectiveness while also restricting civil liberties. Bill 10, introduced by Alberta Premier Jason Kenney in response to the pandemic, quote, allows a single minister to exercise the awesome lawmaking power of parliamentary majority for up to 6 months after the end of the emergency. For example, while Ontario and Quebec wove a dragnet of social distancing rules enforced through punitive fines. But the effectiveness and necessity of those sweeping powers remain unclear, the report said, while blatant policy shortfalls caused a higher rate of death in senior homes and in some cases a failure to provide safe haven for vulnerable populations. The City of Toronto, the report said, dragged its feet on ensuring that there were adequate and safe housing solutions for people experiencing homelessness. Homeless people were always an afterthought for leadership at best, the CCLA said, as were minority populations like Indigenous. I have to disagree with the CCLA. The CCLA maybe is unaware, but in Guelph, and maybe they're correct in Toronto, I don't know the numbers in Toronto, but in Guelph, a lot of the chronically homeless have been put up in hotels on taxpayer money. And there are people who are not chronically homeless, but who are sometimes homeless, I suppose. And those numbers are tracked in a different way. I don't know. There's this whole conversation around that. But people saying that they're an afterthought for leadership at best are not paying attention. Like, there's a lot of money being spent at housing homeless people, and minority populations and Indigenous populations are factored first in a lot of things, especially on provincial and federal government initiatives. Like, just even in the coronavirus rollout stuff, the First Nations populations were specifically named in a whole bunch of initiatives. So, I mean, I don't understand where they came to that conclusion. Back to this. The CCLA rated a number of measures introduced by the various orders of government, giving an F grade to Alberta's Alberta's B10 for being, quote, radically disproportionate to the threat of the pandemic. None of its initial public restrictions received a D, but were later raised to a B+ after the territorial government scaled back some of those limits. A decision by the Newfoundland government to close its borders to non-residents received an F for its direct infringement on rights of movement. The study's conclusion calls on governments to lift emergency restrictions as soon as possible. It also argues that the public must begin to contemplate the way in which civil liberties improve public life overall, even if it comes at the expense of convenience or health in some cases. Quote, we cannot pretend anymore that there is some elusive balance between civil liberties and public health to be found, it said. Our civil liberties inform our public health as much as antibody levels and body temperature. That China may enjoy a lower COVID infection rate today does not make it a society healthier than Canada, whose residents are legally entitled to enjoy freedoms unknown to that state. So while I disagree with certain parts of that, the overall conclusion I agree with. I think that it is really concerning that Guelph now has extended the closure of all Guelph civic things to Labor Day, right? So first we were Easter, then we were Canada Day, now we're Labor Day. And I mean, like, just till Halloween, Christmas, next year, sorry about that, right? So how long do we allow this to carry on? How long is the encroachment on our civil liberties in the name of health going to be appropriate and going to continue to be appropriate? I don't know that it's appropriate now. I don't know that we have the numbers to justify this. I say again, in Guelph and in Vancouver, certain areas in BC, the deaths of the number of overdose deaths in 1 month in BC is more deaths than the COVID deaths total, right, in BC. So in Guelph specifically, we've had, and this is the last I looked, so the numbers could have changed, but we had 12 overdose deaths and 9 COVID deaths. We should be shutting down the economy for this? We should be maybe looking at the efficacy of the safe injection sites as the deaths seem to be going up. So add safe injection site, see death rate go up. That's not the expected outcome, is it? Right? No, I don't think so. Here's another concerning piece of news moving forward. Michael Korenberg, I think that's how you say that, has resigned from his position as chair and board member of UBC's Board of Governors, effective immediately after liking tweets supporting U.S. President Donald Trump and criticizing Black Lives Matter protests. Advanced Education Minister at Melanie J. Mark, our government and UBC are deeply committed to inclusion, justice, and equity for all. The university has an inclusion action plan and has begun implementing it. More, Melanie Mark, I believe UBC will continue its work to provide a world-class education to all of its students in a safe and supportive community environment. So the first tweet here says, hold on, did he get canned for criticism of Black Lives Matter or for liking a tweet put out by the duly elected president of the United States? The woke reign of terror claims another scalp. So is this acceptable? Should a board of the Board of Governors, right, the chair of the Board of Governors, be forced to resign or resign his seat for liking a tweet by Donald Trump or for criticizing Black Lives Matter, which is clearly a Marxist political activist campaign? Like this, I don't think this is organic at all. There is nothing about this that seems like it's organic. Nothing. And well, I mean, when you look at from who George Floyd was to the coordinated protests around the world, claiming that we're doing this because of what happened to George Floyd or some other vaguely resembling some other police versus minority or some other person of who's what? At-risk populations. Sorry. Disappeared from my head. Okay, so yeah, I mean, is that the way we want people leaving positions of that kind of power? Is that the way we want our universities governed in safe spaces? Like, universities are meant to rigorously challenge us and to form us into the adults who are meant to meet the challenges of the day, right? If you need a safe space, like, how are you going to go into a boardroom and negotiate a tough deal if you're like, hold on a second, this is getting a little heated. Do you have a safe space? You know, like, it doesn't make any sense. It's insane. It's insane. And here's an article posted June 20th. Today's June 21st. CBC News is saying, why is being called racist more offensive than racism itself? White fragility silences voices, says advocate. Now, this is a point of view piece. It's under news. If you look in the URL, it's under news, Manitoba point of view, white fragility, racism, white fragility. And so this is an opinion piece masquerading as news, and she gets a lot of things wrong. First, she says, the worst thing you can call a white person is a racist. I think maybe like criminal, thief, liar, those are maybe worse, I think, being directly accused of those things. She talks about how systemic racism is, here she defines systemic racism as exclusionary policies and practices that are entrenched in our institutions. I would love some examples of these exclusionary policies that are entrenched. Which ones? Because that seems easy to fix. Which policies specifically are racist? Anyway, she says, therefore, it is not necessary that every single person in the RCMP is racist for there to be systemic racism in the RCMP. Well, thank goodness. I mean, that's the first time I've seen an end run around the fact that if you're calling the systems racist, the people in them need to also be racist, right? Like, it's not enough to just point at something and say, that's racist. There you go, it's racist. I mean, these days it is. But it is. She gets so much wrong in this that I feel it's not worth going through, because I just have to debunk all of it, right? And it's blatant attempting to put something through a specific lens. And I don't know why it's acceptable for the CBC to run an article like this. Would it be acceptable to run an article that says why being called something is more offensive than, well, I don't know, something attacking black fragility or something to that effect? Like, I don't understand why this article isn't racist, and yet anybody talking about indigenous or black or anything to do with anything other than their own race is seen as not appropriate. But a black person is allowed to talk about white fragility. Like, I don't understand the double standard, other than it's a clear double standard and they're continuing to push their ideology. Here she talks about somehow the recent death of black and indigenous people at the hands of police, and the fact that more than 1/3 of people shot by the RCMP in the past decade were indigenous aren't enough to convince the Bloc Québécois that that systemic racism exists. Well, no, because there are many factors that go into why people get shot by police, and I don't think racism is one of them. Like, is racism one of the reasons why people get shot by police? Is it the reason that 1/3 of people shot by police are indigenous? I'd love to see where she gets her data from, right? Here's the last story for this morning. Global News is reporting in June 19th, 2019, that Canada welcomed more refugees than any other nation in 2018, the UN report says. Here it is. The UNHCR Annual Global Trends Report shows that Canada took in 28,100 of the 92,400 refugees who were resettled in 25 countries during 2018. In 2019, we took in 29,950, right? So if 28,000 was more than any other country, probably an increase over that is more than any other country. So we did that again. And yet, this is a Globe and Mail piece, but it's under a paywall there. So yeah, source the Globe and Mail. So here it is here. Do more, do better. UN refugee chief tells Canada in wake of Security Council loss. You awful people, you terrible, how dare you settle the most refugees of any other nation in the world 2 years running? That's not enough. It's not enough, Canada. Wake up, you racists. Wake up, you fragile white people. Right? You're not allies enough. Like, this is where they're marching. I'm in the middle of discussing the anti-black racism at the Upper Grand District School Board, and what I'm finding out is shocking. Shocking. It's not just the federal government. It's not just the provincial government. It's everywhere. It's all the way down to the education system in the schools. Everywhere. Municipal governments, everywhere. Everywhere. They have been drinking this Kool-Aid, and it is unbelievable that education is taking a back seat to being trained to be a good ally. You have to be active now in your fight against racism and bad thoughts. It used to be that they would focus on being a kind person. You internalize being a kind person and a good person, right? You think about inclusivity and blah, blah, blah. And now they're advocating to teach your children to advocate to be anti-racist. We're around the corner now, guys. Like, I talk about a slippery slope. It's done. It's done. It's done. There's so much that is wrong with the UN looking at what Canada has done and saying, do more. There's so much that is wrong with the fact that the statistics on the white on black, or the shootings of indigenous people are being used to justify articles like this. You know? Not this one. Oh yeah, why being called racist is more offensive than racism itself. It is why we're allowing the situation in the United States to so poison the well here, right? Like, this is a very different style of how Canada sees itself than even in the last 4 years. Like, this is an about face. Like, all of a sudden, Canada is racist. Everybody agrees it's racist, and we need to do something to tear down the racism. But nobody can tell me specifically what it is. We need to get rid of the systemic racism. We're going to stamp out that racism wherever it is. But nobody can exactly tell me what the racism is. Where's the racism specific? This line in this policy is racist because it says we're going to not allow Indigenous and Black school children into the classroom. Oh, okay, we can get rid of that. Sure, let's get rid of that. That's crazy that that's in there, right? But nobody can give me any lines like that. Nobody can say this is the policy that's racist. It's all this this negative thought, this oh well, silence is violence, and all this BS. It's garbage. It's absolute garbage, and it doesn't matter if you disagree, because if you disagree, what happens is you get fired, right? Michael Kornenberg has resigned, or you get told if you don't resign, we're going to fire you for being a racist, right? Or you get told, like Miss Lucky, if you don't say the RCMP is racist, we're going to fire you and get somebody who will say that they are, because they are, right? And if you don't believe it, well, you're not in the club anymore. If you don't believe it, you don't get to keep your job anymore. You're not a good person. We're at that point right now. And if you remain silent, like, there's consequences, right? It's like, oh well, you didn't post that black square, right? That Kramer clip. Did you guys see the Kramer clip? The AIDS ribbon. Why isn't he wearing the ribbon? He's on the walk. It's, man, I don't even know. I don't know the way out of this. It has to play out. At this point we're bobbing along in the water, and there doesn't seem to be will for change. There doesn't seem to be a will for people to say even that the mask is a dumb, contradictory idea that gets people sick. They're not even willing to stand up and say that, despite people getting sick, despite people saying this is a problem. I don't know. Some Father's Day episode, eh? Well, Richard, I hope you have a good day. Happy Father's Day. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. I'll be recording 2 episodes this week. I hope. I've got 2 scheduled. We'll see if it all works out. And have a wonderful, wonderful Father's Day.